Hi folks, this is a short video segment on the appendix in my textbook, which is Composites Finite Element Analysis Essentials for 3D Experience. And the name of the appendix is Hotfix 518. So let me tell you why I decided to prepare this. Now, 3D Experience is a fast evolving software platform. Okay, and every quarter, every 3 months, you get a, a, an update to the software, which is called hotfixes. So after I prepared the manuscript here and prepared all the videos and the content, I got an update from the SAW, which was hotfix 518, and I noticed that there is some very, although minor, but it could be confusing changes that happening in certain locations of your work uh, that I would like to clarify. Okay, so let me put this thing on the slide mode. All right. Remember, after you create your model, it can be, for example, using part design or generative shape design. It can contain, for example, solids, maybe have surfaces, etc. So once you do that, you have to go to the structure model creation, where you actually will mesh your part. That's still the same. This hasn't changed. In the old version, before the hotfix 518, when you click on structure and model creation, you get a dialog box like that. It says create finite element model, and there are some radio buttons here. And if you say okay, well, there's two things can happen. If you already have a solid object in your model, then immediately it's going to get meshed with certain elements, the tetrahedral elements. If you don't have a solid object in your model, then and you don't have a solid object in your model, and if the automatic radio button is on, that's the way it was, then of course you get no elements and no properties. So if you don't have a solid object with automatic, well, there's nothing that's going to mesh, so it's going to be blank blank. Now, what they have done, oh, by the way, in the event that you don't want, even if you have a solid object in your model and you don't want it to be meshed with those tetrahedral elements, then you say none, and of course you go and do the meshing yourself. This is the way it was in the old days. Old days means as of end of March. So now when you go to the structure model creation, you get this dialog box. And it's got two options in it, two picks. One of them is called empty finite element. The other one is a standard. If you click on empty, then doesn't matter what you have in your model, nothing is going to get meshed. On the other hand, if you select the standard, well, there's two possibilities. If there is a solid object in your model, it's going to get meshed with the default tetrahedral elements. On the other hand, if you do not have a solid object in your model, nothing is going to get meshed. So I'm going to show you in the context of a simple example, but notice that there is nowhere in the chapters 1 through or chapters 2 through 14 or 15 that I ever have something like this, okay? Because this appeared after the manuscript was submitted, and then I started to add an appendix to it. Now, so here it is. If you select the empty, then of course nothing is going to get meshed regardless of whether you have a solid object or not. On the other hand, if you select the standard and there is a default here, the default radio button is on, then what's going to happen is going to take your solid object and mesh it with tetrahedral elements. If you say specify, we'll see what happens if you say specify in a second. So if you say specify, see that specify, then you have a choice of what elements uh, besides the tetrahedral one can be used in order to mesh it. For example, in the specify, if you say tetrahedral, of course you're going to get this. There is two other options here. One of them is called sweep 3D mesh, and the other one is octary tetrahedral element, which is coming from the old CATIA days. Okay, it's the same story. Now, if you select sweep 3D, and if there is a solid object there, then it's going to mesh it according to these elements. Okay. Of course, if you put a number of layers here, it's going to use that many layers. For example, I guess this is 3. I meant to say it's 3, but it says 2. But if it's 2, there's going to be 2 layers only. That's a mistake on my behalf. Now there is one other thing that they have changed, is that these two dialog boxes, simulation checks and simulate check, they look cosmetically different, but it's the same thing as before. Essentially, there's some minor changes in the way it looks. So let me show you in the context of an example how it goes. So what I have here, I've created two models. One of them has a solid object there. You can see that. And the other model, this is a different file. It's a surface. There is no solid object. So, and I didn't apply any material, by the way, to it. So let's go ahead and see what happens if we go to structural model creation. Okay, notice that these two show up. If I select this, the empty, it's going to ignore any meshing. So let me try that. Select this. I selected the empty, and notice that it didn't mesh this. Okay, so there are empty nodes and elements, and of course properties are empty. Okay, so let me go back and redo this. So I'm going to go up here. I want to delete this. By the way, you can delete it from here. You can see this. However, if you go to the top, now you can delete it. If you go to the top, now you can go and delete it. Okay, good. So let's do it again. We go to structure model creation. Don't use empty. Use a standard. When you use a standard, it's going to say, okay, do you want the default? There we are. Do you want the default? So if I say the default, which is usually, if it's on, this radio button is selected unless you selected something else in the prior runs, and it's going to stick to that. Default is going to look at this. If it sees a solid object, it immediately meshes the tetrahedral element. So let's see. Look, it meshed it with tetrahedral element. And of course, properties, I didn't apply, it used solid section properties, but I didn't apply any material. That's why there's an exclamation marks here. Okay, so let's delete this again. All the way to the top, delete this. Try it again. So we go to structure model, standard, but now I don't want it to get deleted. I don't want to get mesh with those default elements. But I want to specify how. Or notice that it gives you an option here. For example, the default one that it used was this. The octary tetrahedral mesh, which is pretty much the same as this. This is coming from the old CATIA days. That's fine. It'll do the same thing. But if you say sweep, it says how many layers do you want? I put it 3 here. And the size of the element, of course. Okay. So this is fine. I'm going to say okay. And it did create the mesh. We can look at it in a second. Just bear with me. And then again, properties, but there's an exclamation mark here because I did not apply any material properties. Now, if you want to see your mesh, so there are different ways of doing it. So let me see. Update all meshes. There we are. Okay, or you could have done it from here. Okay. So are we good here? All right. So now when we go to surface, the model that has surfaces, okay, let's see what happens. So we go to structure model creation. There is no solid object here. So if I say empty, well, it's gonna have empty branches. So fine, right there. Okay, let's delete this. Go up there, delete this. I'm showing you the different scenarios. Again, let's go to standard. Now, it doesn't matter what you say here, default, specify, etc. There is no solid object to get meshed. So for example, if I say default, nothing is going to get meshed. There's no solid object. Let's try it again. Delete this. Okay. You go to structure model creation, standard. Even if you say specify and you select any one of these, well, there's no solid object. So you can specify whatever you want. So nothing is going to happen. There. You can see that. Let's try it again. Delete this. Go to the structure model creation. So it really doesn't matter which one you pick. It's not going to mesh anything. It doesn't matter. Let me say empty. Okay, now I have to do the meshing myself because this is a shell element. This is not solid. So that now you can go to, to mesh and then do all the stuff that you were doing before. For example, surface mesh, quad mesh. There we are. Yeah, that's fine, mesh. And here we go. So this is, you better be careful when you read the book or you try to follow the book. You're not going to see this. This is the thing that you're going to be noticing. All right, folks. Good luck.